Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Peace and love, y'all. It's Brother Ali. It's the Travelers Podcast. Thank you for being here. This is a special episode. I realize I say that every week, and I always mean it, and I mean it this week. We're filming in Istanbul, Turkey. It's very rare that I actually have my guest in person with me. And this is Aamer Rahman is a comedian and really just one of the tribe of fearless artists that speak the truth and have made that, the center of what we do. And if you're a regular listener or watcher of the podcast, you know how much it matters to me that, that I'm in the same tribe as Chuck D, that I'm in the same tribe as Brother Jay from X Clan, that I'm in the same tribe as Yassine Bey and Immortal Technique and, Rakim and all of these people that have created this chorus of voices. And so Aamer Rahman is somebody that came on the scene with a series of clips that went viral. And one of them was called Reverse Racism. I've got it memorized. I say it to him all the time. It's really, it's funny. A lot of people don't like my comedy. A lot of white people don't like my comedy. I can recite it the way I do a great song because it's that. As a matter of fact, if you haven't yet, keep it here, open another tab and go watch that and then check this out. But Dave Chappelle said that particular sketch is the Rosetta Stone of comedy. And so, there was a series of clips that came out and I was like, man, I have to know this person. And so we ended up connecting. He's like, yo, did you not remember that I met you at a show when you were, several years ago? Well, he took a long break from comedy, and he's somebody that is amongst my comedian friends is known to be like an MF Doom or like somebody that pops, like a Bobby Fischer that pops out and does something great and then just goes back into the shadows. Somebody that has this kind of really interesting, unique kind of status. And so Amir has gone viral again with clips of him. You may have seen him standing, wearing a MF Doom sweatshirt and talking about what's happening in Palestine and basically breaking down Zionism. And these clips are, not only are they masterfully delivered pieces of stand-up comedy, but they also are informational and they're also, multimedia presentations where some of them at the end of the clip, it'll go into a montage of clips, of the things that he's talking about. So these clips have gone viral. It's one of the few people that you can see standing straight up on stage and telling the truth about what's happening. And I just so happen to be very, very dear, close friends. We live just blocks from each other in Istanbul. So this is somebody that I share a lot of life with, and I'm really grateful to have on the podcast. So this is going to be, if you're like me, when you see somebody like this pop up, you're like, who is this and where do they come from? And like, what is this? So this is your opportunity to see and hear about that. We're brought to you as always by the Zakat Foundation. I'm a small independent hip hop artist that just has some dope music, and me and my friends are going to try to get it out to the world. That's how Zakat Foundation is. It's a really small group of people that are trying to do something about global poverty and instability and homelessness and so Zakat, ZAKAT.org is their website. Zakat US is how you follow them. They do dope work all over the world. It's an Islamic organization, but they don't proselytize and they don't only help Muslims. So you don't have to be Muslim to be part of what they're doing. So I'm suggesting to you right now, all the links are in all the things. Go to zakat.org, find something dope that they're doing. $5 provides a meal, $50 supports an orphan for a month. It's incredible work, and we're really grateful that they're part of this work and that they're part of this. They've been part of this podcast from day one. They got in on this from the very beginning, and so a big part of why we're able to do this is because of their support. Stay right here. Enjoy this episode of Travelers Podcast. I basically have like a few categories of people I do podcasts with. It's almost nobody that I just like straight up don't know. But there's like a group of people who I know them, like we're in the same circles, but it's our first time kicking it. Then there's people that I know, but I haven't seen them in a long time. You know what I mean? So this is the first one where I'm talking to somebody that I know and see all the time, like
every week.
Yeah, at least like multiple times a week. So it's like it's a new thing to try to figure out how to do it. But I think that people are seeing you again, like you're having, from what in my eyes is like your second viral moment. Like there was like a moment when, reverse racism, and then the clips around that time, then there was like an interest in that. And so this is another one too. And I know that when I first saw reverse racism, first of all, I didn't know that we had met. I didn't put it together that like all that, but you're a really kind of like elusive figure. You know what I mean? Like I remember being like, yo, well, who is this dude? And what is it? And I looked around, I couldn't find anything. I'm not trying to be. Yeah.
But I just like don't put out stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. But so I do want to give people a chance to get to like know something about who you are, what your background is, what your relationship with comedy is, what your ethos is, like why you're doing what you're doing. So I guess if we could start with just your early life, your childhood, family, that kind of thing.
So I was born in Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Lived there until I was 6.
Mm-hmm.
Moved to Australia,
mm-hmm.
which was the first big culture shock. Lived in Australia until I was 10. Moved back to the Middle East for another 4 years. Then back to Australia. Culture shock number 2. Finished high school and then was there until I moved here to Turkey.
And both your parents are from Bangladesh, right?
Yes.
So is your passport is
Australian?
Okay.
I mean, I technically still have Bangladeshi citizenship.
Okay.
But I haven't had the passport in years.
But
also growing up in the Middle East, we were very close to Bangladesh. So like I got to spend a lot of time there growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Like 3 months over a summer. So, I speak the language, like I've stayed in the village. Like it's a place that I do have a connection to.
When I went to Saudi Arabia the first time, it took me a minute to really figure out like, oh, Bengalis in Saudi Arabia are like how Mexican people are seen in the States. It's like, this is a class of people are just being tolerated to a certain degree, but only to do like me. Like, so what were your parents?
So my dad was a professor at a university.
Okay.
We lived in a compound with like everyone else from around the world. People go and live there for 2 or 3 years and then move back home. And at that age, I definitely didn't, understand exactly what was happening. But yeah, it's a very racialized, stratified society. I mean, all across like the Gulf.
Do Bengali people have that similar position, like across the? Like, is that a common thing? Like, is it that way in Qatar? Is it that way in?
Yeah, I would say across the Gulf, like it's like South Asians.
Yeah.
But definitely, Bangladeshis make up a big chunk of that labor class. It's labor class is a nice way of putting it. Like it's really bordering on slavery at times, especially when it comes to construction and that kind of stuff, building in like that intense heat.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's crazy. So I wonder, like, what was how were they treated? You know what I mean? Like, if he was a professor, you know what I mean? Like was your life and was their life a more like middle class one, and like were they treated well?
Oh, my parents?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we live, like it's kind of a segregated life. Definitely at that time, foreigners who came to work at institutions or companies or whatever would live in compounds. As a professor in a university, there's that like cultural kind of deference. Like he's a teacher.
Okay.
The way race works everywhere is that,
like the exceptional group.
Yeah, or, even two people from the same group depending on their sort of societal standing, would be treated completely different. We're seen as two completely different types of people, you know, even though we're clearly like we're from the same place.
Right. Yeah, that's a trip. But I mean, you always identified really as Australian.
No,
No?
as Bangladeshi actually, because you know, by the time I got to Australia, like the first time moving to Australia was so alienating, and you know, identity-wise, just being treated as just something that didn't belong. I just never got to a place where I felt Australian, you know. And then by the time I was old enough to understand what Australia was, then it was like it's an active thing of like I don't want to be that. So in Australia, like when I get asked like, you know, where are you from, which people will ask regularly.
Yeah.
You know, most people would be like, "Oh, I'm from here." You know, I grew up here or whatever. I'll just be like Bangladesh and keep it moving. Like I don't need you to know how long I've been here or that, you know, I went to school here. It doesn't matter. I'm still not. I don't feel like I'm from here.
I feel like a lot of Americans have this feeling about this like romanticized view of Australia that like, man, I'm going to go all the way around the world. And when I get there, it's going to be this exotic tropical place.
Yeah.
And I mean, in terms of the landscape and the physical, you know, just like the physical geography of it, it is that. But man, that is one of the most like spiritually disorienting places in the world. It might be the most.
It's a brutal place. Like, and you know, this is like all the images people consume of Australia are like beaches and Crocodile Dundee and the crocodile hunter and, you know, this kind of like laid back sort of beach lifestyle or whatever. But it's like, it was a brutal settler colony. It's where it was a giant floating prison where people were sent. And so the white people who were there were either convicts, prisoners, criminals, or the people sent to police them.
Yeah.
And they almost exterminated an entire continent of people.
Yeah.
You know, the size of Australia. People look at the map now and it's just like a, you know, it's a big empty desert in the middle and there's like, you know, cities along the edge. But like that entire continent was inhabited by indigenous people.
When you talk about colonialism, I always felt like this is what it's like when the colonizer really get their way, when they almost entirely eradicate, so that in public life and daily life, this is what that feels like, you know what I mean? And have this like landmass almost entirely to themselves. And the feeling of disconnection and like just the how beautiful it is physically, but spiritually, psychologically, energetically, you know what I'm saying? And it's funny that we were just talking about the fact that I want to book shows there, because like talking like this is just like, well, just
it's the worst place on earth.
Stay the hell out there. Why do you come? It's like, well, because there's beautiful people everywhere. You know what I mean? And like I'm everywhere, no matter what the situation is, there's beautiful people. But like, man, how would you describe for somebody that's not been there, you know, what that kind of spiritual psychic energy is? I think there.
The way I would describe it, you know, because people just think, oh, it's another Western country,
yeah,
right? But like having been to the US or Canada or UK, it is, but it just always felt like the psyche was 20 years behind. You know, like it was just like it just hadn't developed. And for me, I think like a big part of that was not just the violent colonization, but they also like banned non-white immigrants until the late 60s or early 70s. They had the white Australia policy.
Yeah.
So they just haven't interacted with other people.
Yeah.
Like we went in the late 80s, right? South Asians went in the late 80s. A lot of East African immigrants came in the mid 90s. Like this society hadn't dealt with Africans as a group until the mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
So it's like a time-space distortion. It's like an alternate dimension where things look and feel the same, but there's just something under it that is just deeply unsettling and backwards.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a certain type of like violence and even like violence to self. You know what I mean? Like there's this thing about like, oh, they love to drink down there. You know what I mean? And in all settler colonial like projects, there's got to be some very deep type of intoxication.
Yeah, it's an enforced form of forgetting.
Yes. Yeah.
Like I actually cannot deal with the reality of this existence.
Right.
So I need to black it out.
Yeah.
I need to absolutely like delete it at the end of every week. I just need to delete all the files.
Yeah. And like every day almost. Like you go to like, England or something like that, or like all throughout Europe, and people definitely drink, but there's a different energy that they drink with there than they do in places where white people have like gone and like set up shop and tried to eliminate the people and then live on the land without a relationship, without a real heart and spiritual relationship with the land. They're like the drinking is different, the drugs are different, the fighting is different. Like there's like this like deeply violent spirit there.
And also, like you said, the dissonance between what was done there, and the fact that the appearances of something completely normal.
Yes.
It's almost like a horror movie where like, it's a unsettling quiet,
right,
everything's normal. But like, if you just scratch the surface, like what this country is built on is such like a horrific campaign of extermination and, taking children, in a program to like literally breed them out of existence. Like so much insane stuff was done in Australia to people and to the actual continent, to the animals and to nature. To achieve that level of destruction, you would need now like bombs to clear a continent of that many people, to cause that level of ecological devastation. But they kind of did it by hand. Like, what level of like, brutality does that require to be able to enact that on a continent?
And that's not, that doesn't leave a people in a generation. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh yeah, their grandparents fought in a war and then they don't talk about it, but whatever. Like that, it's like, that's literally in people. When I first started traveling for music, so I grew up in Minnesota and we had the connection with the First Nations people. There's kind of a lot of First Nations people in Minnesota, and you have access to elders. There's actually a reservation. There's a res that is in the city in South Minneapolis, which is very rare. There's only like 2 of those in America. And so we had a lot of access to those stories. And so I grew up hearing about them. And I went to Malaysia once when I was like a kid, or when I was like a teenager, and they were saying like, Malaysia is 1/3 ethnic Malay, and then 1/3 Indian and 1/3 Chinese. And I was like, oh, how'd they get here? And they're like, they put them on ships and brought them here. The Dutch put them on ships and brought them here. And I was like, yo, they did that somewhere else? I had no idea. And they're like, yeah. And I was there with like African-American elders that are like, brother, they did that all over the world. I'm like, oh, I thought that was just us. But when I went to, I was like talking to like the Turrbal people in Australia. And they were telling the stories about boarding schools and about all of the things that you're talking about. And I'm like, yo, you hear these, that, intellectually, that this white supremacist settler colonial thing is a force that operates
goes
in
everywhere.
Similar ways. But once I sat with somebody, and they had no idea that the Lakota people went through it too. So I'm sitting there listening to these stories and I'm like, they did the exact same thing to the people where I'm from. You know what I mean? It's just like these light bulb moments. And so when we look at what's happening in Palestine, it's like, man, we know what's on the other side of what they're attempting to do.
Absolutely.
Like we know what that looks like. There are places that you can go and visit, and there are people that you can still talk to. You know what I mean? And so, one of the things that I love that I see getting shared so much, and somebody just shared it, like my wife just, I think, sent it to you, that like the BTS, like the the K-pop
Oh,
community.
the quote.
All colonized people see themselves in Palestine, and all colonizers see themselves in Israel. It's like, man, yeah, you have a beautiful way of distilling things into.
Because, like you said, the playbook is the same.
Yeah.
You know, the settler colony is not just like a bad thing. Like the ultimate goal is to reduce those people out of existence,
Yes.
or as close to out of existence as possible, physically, culturally, politically, to erase.
Yeah, spiritually, psychically, like they're like, it would be better if we don't even remember them.
Or we remember them in the most, tokenistic, unthreatening way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then what you're left with is a horror scene where everybody involved is living that nightmare, whether they acknowledge it or not. You know what I mean? So I remember hearing that like these like IDF soldiers, that there's a major problem of like drug addiction among former IDF soldiers, because like the things that they had to do, like what they thought they were signing up for, the idea that they've been sold versus what their lived experience was like having to be in that and having to carry that stuff out. Like, man.
Yeah, the human mind is not built for that.
The nervous system, the spirit, the souls, like there's still a soul in there. Yeah. And when they were talking about that, I'm like, yes, man, there's like a certain type of violent intoxication that comes along with having to live as a being that still wants to be human. So in university, that's when you start organizing.
Yes.
Yeah. And what was it? So, we talk about like the thing, or the like, what are the conditions around building your understanding? Like what, hey, I don't like the word radicalized, but like what were the things that made you?
I think just growing up, having the experience of growing up in the Middle East and being in Bangladesh, and like having those things as like being central to my identity, being Muslim, being brown, being connected to these places, and then growing up in a place where those things had no value. Like, and this is pre 9/11, so it wasn't even like, like people didn't know what Muslim was when I was in high school, but I just felt so dislocated, and just the experiences of racism, like I got, for the last 2 years of high school, I got a scholarship to like a very like white, very like elite school. And that was the end for me. That was the end for me. I was like, how, I need to burn like this entire thing down.
It's so funny. I think when people do that, they're like, oh, we're going to give him a chance to come into our world and benefit from our highest. But man, you talk to the only black or brown person like in those like high institutions. Yeah. And I mean, it's like, I'm learning my way how to navigate this thing. But if you really talk to the person, they're just like, man, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I had never seen wealth like that. Like you're sitting next to a kid whose parents donated like $100,000 to the school, and there's like a thing with their name like on the building. Like it was, it was really elite. Like it was another universe. I mean, that wasn't the first thing. It was growing up there. It was already planting the seeds.
What are the types of experience you're having? Or your family, or?
I think just that constant schoolyard sort of racism.
I mean, fights, names, being blamed for stuff.
Fights, names, getting in fights over racism, getting in trouble for the fighting. And yeah, I just remember, I think back to like when we first got to Australia, and I remember this conversation that I had with my dad where he was trying to tell me, you have to work harder than everyone else. And I just at the time, I just couldn't understand what he was saying. And then by the time I understood it, I was like, why? Why? Why should I? Like, I don't want to. I don't want to achieve at university. I don't want to go and do a job like this. Like by the time I finished high school, I just didn't want. I was just like, this is all rigged. Like, I've been to school now with kids who are gonna go further than everyone else in life because of who their dad is.
It's just because their name's on the bill.
Yeah, this is like beyond being white. Like, this is just like they're gonna go 10 times further than the average white person.
Right.
And
when you say white privilege, white people, think of those people.
Yeah,
You know what
exactly,
I mean?
exactly.
And they're not wrong, but you know what I mean?
I mean, these are like country club level, white people.
Like elites.
And so, yeah, I think I was, but I didn't have like a language for it. I didn't have like an understanding of these things. So then when, I get to university and then a big part of it was music. Like in Australia also at the time, like there was nothing that would explain this to you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? There's nothing on TV. There's nothing on radio. There's nothing that's really speaking to this stuff.
There's not a Spike Lee, Public Enemy.
It's again, like the country is so far behind.
Yeah.
And it's so small, right? Like people think of Australia as like this giant place, which like physically it is. But it's like a couple of big cities.
Right.
All right. So culturally, it's like a small town. Like there's 5 free-to-air channels. Like it is a very small place. So the scope of like opportunity or for culture to really develop is tiny. So really it was like music is the thing that started to give me, even though it was American, like listening to Public Enemy or Rage Against the Machine, again, because the playbook is the same. It doesn't have to be identical. And then, like reading Malcolm and, the same stuff that so many of us go through. Mm-hmm. Then you start to build like a framework for understanding it.
What were in terms of like, the freedom struggles, like within, we have this long history of like organizing. And so if you look at the Black freedom struggle, you've got SNCC and CORE, and you've got the Panthers and the Nation of Islam and the, street organizations that started, that really had the intention of protecting the Black. And, most of those things that they call gangs started out with some sort of Black power agenda as well. What's the history of that like in Australia?
There was Indigenous civil rights movement. There was an Indigenous Black power movement. There was artistic
when they
renaissance.
Say Black, they mean like what? There's a different language around.
Well, First Nations people in Australia identify as Black.
Okay. So, but there was a history of those movements.
Absolutely, yeah, and
still,
I mean,
were they inspired directly by the movements in America?
Yes.
Or
yes. Yes. So I've been very lucky to learn from and sit with some of those activists who are still around. And they were very aware of what was happening in the U.S. American soldiers used to come to Australia, and so they would bring literature and that kind of stuff with them. And Malcolm X, Dr. King, like these are also huge relevant figures in terms of Indigenous liberation struggles in Australia, and of course their own freedom fighters. And there's incredible organizing happening now. So, on what we call Invasion Day, Australia Day, there's always been marches, but in the last 5 to 10 years, they've become huge because of just a new generation of organizers who also have new tools, just like BLM. History hasn't changed, but the tools that people have, the ability to communicate ideas, the ability to organize has changed because of technology. Those marches are incredible now.
Is there some sort of like group identity? So like in America, you obviously have the indigenous people, and then you have this like block of people that were brought from Africa as enslaved people, and then the generations of like their children. And so there's very clearly, and then the Europeans that came there. You know what I mean? And then others came later and usually have to figure out where they are, how they're going to try to navigate that particular. So there is an idea, I think, in America that, even other groups that see themselves as oppressed or are oppressed pretty much are using the language and a lot of the intellectual tools around the Black freedom struggle. Is there some sort of solidarity of non-white people? Is there some sort of like culture that's developed in Australia?
I would say there is now. But again, people migrated to Australia so late. I'm saying like South Asians in the 80s, even compared to the UK. South Asians in the UK have been there 4 or 5 generations deep now.
Okay.
I'm not even born in Australia, right? Like my son is actually technically the first generation born in Australia.
Yeah.
And I think, the stereotypes and the deep hatred of Indigenous people is so endemic to Australian culture that it's really one of the first things immigrants learn. Like it's part of being Australian. I think it's really taken a couple of generations to begin to unlearn that. So now there's definitely see like incredible solidarity amongst young people. But I think it's still, there's like a long way to go, and I still wouldn't call it mainstream. I don't think the mainstream of immigrants in Australia consider themselves settlers. You know what I mean? Like that's not a realization people are comfortable with. But it is something that we can talk about now that we wouldn't have been talking about 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The other thing about growing up in Australia is when you look back and realize what you were taught or not taught about First Nations history and culture. Like I distinctly remember we had like a dot painting exercise in art class, and we watched some video about Indigenous art, and then in art class that day we did dot paintings, and I did a dot painting of the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. Like, it's like absurd. We didn't learn about the resistance. We didn't learn about the wars. We didn't learn about the massacres. None of that.
Yeah.
And unless you seek that out, like you go to university or you go to a library and someone even tells you that it happened for you to know that it's something you need to know.
Right.
You can really get through life.
Yeah.
Not knowing about it. Like you can go to an adult Australian now and ask them about massacres, and they'll be like, where?
Yeah.
They wouldn't have the first clue about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot of things that I grew up like being so related to the Black street freedom struggle. That like, Tulsa, there like just was recently a documentary that came about the Tulsa race riots. And, it's like I grew up knowing about those things. And it was interesting when that documentary came out and people started talking about it. I was like, oh, so that did happen. Even me, like growing up, knowing about it, I've always known about it. And I've heard, like, I remember one time, Juneteenth just became like a popular thing. But like, I grew up going to Juneteenth. I grew up performing. Right. One of my first public performances was at Juneteenth when I was like 12, 13 years old. You know what I mean? And there was a woman there. There was like an elder auntie there who was in Tulsa when that happened. Wow. And she got up and spoke and she told us about it. And that might have been my first time hearing about it. Again, I'm like 13 or something like that. There's still something about when that documentary came out. I was like, okay, so that's not just something that a few of us, that's not just a rumor we heard.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, so crazy how those things can really and truly just be
and even
stricken
then, right?
from
like,
the record.
It's a documentary. It's not in their curriculum, right?
No, yeah.
So like people could still just not know about it or not find out about it if they don't want to.
Right. You still have to know that something like that exists. Go search it out and click on it and sit your kids down and make them watch it. Yeah.
And it requires undoing so many myths, right? Like the idea that Black people built something this successful.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not acknowledged.
Right.
And then the level of terror and violence that was unleashed in reaction to it. Like it's just, if you're not taught these things, if you're not even willing to acknowledge the horror of slavery itself, then like these extra details afterwards, like how's it going to become like mainstream knowledge?
So then we get to the phase where organizing becomes
right.
the focus, and like, what does that look like for you? How does it start? What is organizing in Australia at that moment, and what was it for you?
So just after 9/11, there was the usual hysteria about Muslims, but then a Norwegian ship rescued 400 Afghan asylum seekers in the middle of the ocean and was coming to Australia. So this was now like front page news every day. Like this Norwegian, the Tampa has rescued 400 Afghans. They're coming to Australia. Are we going to let these people in? Who are they? The government deployed the SAS, which is our special forces, to go and board the ship. Right? This was like the orchestrated media op. Who are these people? 9/11 just happened. How do we know who they are? Right? You couldn't imagine like a more insane scenario for a government, trying to get elected. And I think, there was post 9/11, but I think seeing those people being victimized that way and being used as a political football like that, and then, the government lying about these people, like threatening to throw their children in the water, and using photos of people with life vests who were in the water, saying that we were trying to basically blackmail Australia into rescuing them. Just like really horrific, really just, I just don't know how to describe it, like a hateful sociopathic use of these people as a political football. I think that really was like really pivotal for me, and so.
How old were you then?
2001. Making me do math on the podcast.
No, I mean, like, were you in high school?
No, that's in my first year of university.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was 17, 18.
Okay.
Australia had a policy of mandatory detention. Anyone seeking asylum in Australia was automatically detained in a detention center. These detention centers are built like out in the middle of the desert. It's just a concentration camp. Just steel bars, barbed wire, prison camp in the middle of the desert.
Guantanamo. Like you arrive in Guantanamo. That's your Ellis Island.
So visiting there, doing support for people in there, rallies.
Were you able to go in and?
It was just like visiting prison. You gotta clear it ahead of time. Security checks. You go. Your name's not on the list. Your name's on the list. They're not allowed to see anyone today. This kind of stuff. The next year, there was a protest organized at the Woomera Detention Center, which is one of these places in the middle of the desert. Woomera was also like a missile testing facility. And, I was still like very young. Like I just knew those people in the news are put in these prisons in the middle of the desert. I don't know what's happening. I'm getting on the bus. There's people that organize buses. You get on the bus. Maybe we're going to stand outside. We're going to protest a little. Didn't know what. Get there. People have come from all over the country. It's like a tent city in the middle of the desert. Okay. It's the first evening. Everyone get some stuff to make noise. We're going to get as close to the detention center as possible so people know that we're here. Like just the very basic solidarity thing. Like this is a high security facility.
Yeah.
Right? We've heard that they're flying in extra cops from the city. Like, it's not something that's just, people, they're just going to let happen.
Yeah.
So people...
Which is a beautiful thing, by the way. Just because you know that there are human beings in there that are like, does anybody know I'm here?
Yeah.
That's one of the major things.
I mean, later on, we would visit people in similar facilities. I mean, people are looking at the sky for 24 hours a day. Like they can't see land.
Like, where am I?
Yeah.
Does anybody know that I'm here?
Yeah.
Like, literally
Yeah.
anything can happen to me, and the world
Yes.
might not never even, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, very likely, like in most cases, when you have a population like that that's trapped in that way, we never hear most of those
Yeah.
stories. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a beautiful thing just to have a like noise making campaign. You know what I mean?
So
Like, I went to jail one time just on some like overnight, and there were people outside beating pots
Yeah.
and pans and stuff like that. And I heard them out there, and I was like, oh, this is kind of nice.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
just
Like,
to-
there are people outside that are just letting us know, like, hey, we're here. We know you. We see you're a human
these are
being.
people like, literally held like in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like no one can hear you scream. Like it was like truly like really brutal conditions. So we're marching, we're heading towards the camp. Just imagine like open desert, right? And there's some fences and with barbed wire, like pretty big fences. And people were like trying to climb the fence and hang off the fence or whatever. And then the fence just started to buckle and people just pulled it down. Enough for everyone to just keep walking. And we kept going and kept going, kept going. And suddenly we were literally at the detention center. Like we were there. Like we could touch the bars. Not like we could see it anymore. We were right there. And the people inside had already broken out. They were like, people are coming. We're getting out of
This is
here
it.
today. So they had already orchestrated a breakout.
Subhanallah.
There's a row of bars. There's like a center section of barbed wire, and then another row of bars. And people are climbing up onto the top, right? People are trying to jump over. People are trying to escape. Police are arriving. It's total like no one had any idea this was going to happen.
Are there organizers like are there people with megaphones saying like we're doing this or we're doing or this is just a crowd of people realize because you didn't even know this is a possibility.
If there were people with megaphones, it was just to chant. Like, you know what I mean? Like this is not a two-way thing.
Okay.
This is the people inside being like, this
just
is
realizing like, yo, this fence isn't about anything. And then you get up close. Like this is all unfolding in the moment.
Yes.
This isn't the plan.
Yes. And so people are climbing out because there's the hole in the fence is sort of head height.
Okay.
Right. And so people are literally getting out of the detention center and crowd surfing into the crowd to get out. Total chaos. By now, the center security are driving out in vans to get people, to capture people.
Yeah.
Right? I saw them grab a kid. Like a van pulled up and like 10 guys in jumpsuits came out and grabbed the kid and put him in the van and took him back.
Like 8 years old.
10, 12 years old. Everyone starts running back to our campsite. Where are we going to take these people?
But there are some people that are out and
There's
with you.
a lot of people who are. Everyone's running back to the campsite. We get back, and in between, the vans are coming to like intercept people and catch them, basically. End up back at the campsite. People are hiding in tents. They fly in all these extra cops. The entire camp is surrounded, like just a full ring of security. And now, like, where are people going to go? Some of them turn themselves back in. Some of them try to escape. Some of them end up in jail. Some of us ended up in cells with people.
Yeah, because how do they know? They don't know who's who.
I ended up in a cell with 10, 11 guys and a kid. And I remember they were asking me like if I was okay, if I was cold, and
like the asylum seekers.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you okay?
Yeah, and I remember
they're hosting you.
And I was like apologizing. I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm so sorry we couldn't get you out of here.
You're speaking Arabic with them?
No, just English. They speak English. And they just said they were like, thank you. Just tell your friends thank you. That someone came. So that was a big thing. From that experience was like when you see like what a state is willing to do to people, what the kind of violence it's willing to enact on people. And I remember the next day we went back, we did another march, we got close again, and there was like, this time they had like a ring of riot cops.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget, there was one riot cop who was bawling. He was bawling under his visor. I don't know if he was scared. I don't know if he was guilty. It's just like an image that stuck with me, And not that I like really feel sorry for him, but it was just like, it was such a surreal moment. Like we're literally chanting outside a concentration camp, and these armored riot cops are defending it, and inside are like some of the most vulnerable people like in the world,
Yeah. So I mean, how do you go on after that? Like, so then, okay, so like, I've also been a long-term organizer, and you have those amazing moments, and then the next day somehow you got to get up and like, okay, so like that big event is over. Now what? How do I sustain this? You know what I mean? And how do I encourage people around me to sustain this? So making a lifestyle out of something like that is very different from being in that moment. Like what was that like for you?
I mean, through stuff like that, I met like a lot of my closest friends.
Okay.
Young people of color who grew up, in a similar way, who are kind of finding consciousness the same way. So there was that aspect to it that I really found people that like, I'm like, are still my friends today, and we would do all these things together that kind of essentially prisoner support for people who were in these detention centers, doing campaigns around, immigration and asylum and, all the usual stuff, like, trying to educate people who don't care about it, trying to, do all kinds of sort of organizing. And I think also, like, for a lot of us, eventually, like, you really hit a wall, especially in a place like Australia, where like it's still happening now. Like Australia went one step further, and they moved those detention centers offshore. Like, we pay countries like Nauru to violate their own constitution by housing detention centers there. So, they're like, the model just got more and more brutal. But, there was that aspect of it, but also, it was also tied to being Muslim. It was tied to my idea of Islam being about justice. It was, tied to like all the ongoing stuff that was happening to Muslims, like Muslim immigrants, not just asylum seekers post 9/11. So it wasn't something that you could really escape at that point. All of my friends were doing something, even if it was, community organizing or, not necessarily like very political stuff. It was still like people trying to find ways to be together and be Muslim and kind of create something that was, not always defensive.
So if you're watching this podcast for the first time, or if you're new to this, I'm Brother Ali, and the reason that people will watch me and listen to me get on the mic and talk with my friends for hours and hours is because I make underground, independent hip-hop music, and I've been doing it for a long time. In this crazy climate, one of the things you hear us talk about is that I put out a new album called Love and Service. This particular album is produced by one person. We started it during the pandemic, and we did not know each other. I just came across his work because he had worked with another fiercely militant, educational, super dope artist of the people named Paris. I saw that Paris had a new video, and it was this animated video, super ill. So I reached out to the guy that did the video and found out that he also was an amazing producer. We started talking, during the pandemic, and making music together. At that time, he couldn't go to the record store to find records for his inspiration. Let's just say it like that. So he was sampling and taking inspiration from children's educational films. And so I ended up making songs about all of the things that I was experiencing with my family moving to a new country in the middle of a pandemic. I was in a community that experienced cancel culture. And at the beginning, it was just a cool detail that I'm a Muslim American artist and he is an anti-Zionist Jewish producer, animator, illustrator. So that part was just a cool little thing. But as this project went on, what was happening in Palestine became a focus. And so that's another layer and element of this album. There's animated, illustrated videos for all of the songs that we've released so far. The album's on all the streaming services. And because of our stance on Palestine, we have not had any coverage in the press. We had Chuck D play us. We had Amy Goodman play us on her show, Bobito Garcia, but no press outlets, no festivals this year. It's the first time that that's ever happened. And so the distinction that we have and what's special about this project is being supported exclusively by the people that care about this message, that care about this movement, that care about this music. So if you go to brotherali.com, you can we made this incredibly beautiful, we really spent way too much money on the vinyl because of how much we care about the project. So that price point is going to be reflected in what you pay for it. But there's a limited number of deluxe vinyl that now that it's actually it's finally, back from manufacturing and I've been able to see it. It's incredibly dope, if I do say so myself. So go to brotherali.com. You can order the exclusive vinyl while it's still in. And you can go to all the streaming services and run it up. Despite all of the opposition that we've had millions of streams already on this album, which is a beautiful thing. So go and listen to the Love and Service album, order it, save it to your playlist, share it with your people. This is something really beautiful that you are absolutely a part of because you're the only industry that is bringing this message and music to the people. So go and check that out. Did you have a relationship with comedy that was ever separate from the work, as it were? Like, so when you're a kid, like, were you know what I mean? Like, you hear so many comedians were like, I saw somebody, Bernie Mac is like, man, my mom was crying one time. I crawled up in her lap after my dad had left us. And we were looking at Ed Sullivan, and there was a comedian, Flip Wilson was on, and she started laughing and crying at the same time. And he's like, wow, I want to be able to make crying mommies laugh.
Wow.
That's Bernie Mac's like, I'm going to be a comedian.
No. Nothing like that.
I really didn't think that's...
But like, I loved comedy.
Yeah.
And again, comedy was something that spoke about race.
Yeah.
Like Chris Rock and Chappelle's show and like all of that stuff was, big for me. But I never, in a different way, like most comedians would be like, yeah, I loved Chris Rock. And I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I never considered it as a thing. It's just something that I loved. Just like I listened to music, I never thought about being a musician. These were just things that I really loved. Then Allah Made Me Funny came to Australia. So I met Aamer Rahman and Preacher Moss. And, my friend Nazim and I were basically like their roadies, like we were just kind of like local community kids who were helping to promote the show or whatever.
Okay.
But I don't think I'd been to... No, I had been to comedy shows before that. Okay. But never been to a comedy show like that.
Right.
Never been to a comedy show designed for Muslims.
Yeah. So for people watching this, I mean, we've had everybody except for Azim on the show. But I mean, so Preacher Moss, who's the OG, like, Muslim American comedian, like, and then Aamer Rahman and Mo Amer and there's also a comedian Azim that was part of the earlier iteration of it. Like these guys doing a tour based on it's Allah made me funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like based on like we as Muslims can have our own comedy, and this is based on our experience. It's for us, by us, and I mean that was a big deal. Like when that thing,
it was huge.
yeah. When that thing went through the Muslim world, and I mean they went all over the world, and I mean places where English is definitely not the first language spoken. There were people coming out just standing there watching, like that's a comedian with a big beard saying Allah, like they're talking about us.
I mean, I'm just really realizing it now. Was like a real incredible crash course in comedy, because there's something about being backstage at something that kind of demystifies it a little bit.
Yes.
Shows you how it works, shows you that the performer's like a normal person.
Yeah.
You see
that
this
even just the idea that like, oh, they're not just making that up.
Yeah.
Like even seeing it 3-4 nights in a row.
That was the next thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
Seeing the same show a few times, seeing how the joke changes or doesn't change. Like that really, I mean, I've always said that I wouldn't have become a comedian if I hadn't had that experience. But now I'm really thinking about the details of it and being able to be with them and hang out with them. And again, like, you know, see someone pacing backstage and like all of that stuff, because we're just so used to like the magic of seeing the video of the person on stage saying the thing and the audio is perfect or whatever. And this is also the time Russell Peters special was going viral.
Okay.
Right. And people hadn't really seen something like that.
Man, that was a moment too. Like I think people that aren't connected to like the Brown world, like man, when that Russell Peters thing hit, that
was something else. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
But so this is that was that little era that was happening. So then I entered an open mic competition kind of like around then.
Crazy. And was it like a specific one? Was it just like,
so
you know how they're like dumbass, like,
no,
it's Brown guy comedy night. Like,
no. So Melbourne actually hosts like one of the biggest comedy festivals in the world.
Yes. Okay.
Which we just take for granted growing up. It's like a thing that happens once a year. We go and see the people on TV.
But it's like that one, the one in Ireland or something. There's one in
Edinburgh.
Edinburgh, yeah.
Edinburgh, and
Scotland,
then Just for Laughs, I guess, was the big one. But you know,
and there's a one in Canada.
That would be Just for Laughs.
Okay.
So they have an annual raw comedy competition. Nazim entered. A week later, I entered. Our friends would come to all the heats. And so, I'd been listening to Chappelle and Bill Hicks and Rock. So it was just all political stuff for my friends. Like, it was make fun of white people. It was calling Australia racist. It was, and I remember specifically in that first set, I had a joke about, one of the iconic images from the Cronulla riots were like people wearing the Australian flag as a cape. So, I had a joke about super racists, and like that's not a riot, when kids in Palestine throw rocks at tanks, that's a riot. I'm just remembering this now that I had like one of my first jokes was about Palestine. And so, we got through the heats and, I ended up in the national final. So then the heats are like in a little bar, right? With like 20 of your friends. Everyone brings their friends. Mm-hmm. But if you're Muslim, you bring like 10 times as many friends as everyone else. Yeah. The national final.
Everybody's late, but we're there.
They're there. And they're loud. Yeah. The national final is in Melbourne Town Hall. 1,200 people.
Very different.
Very different. But it's not clicking for me yet. I'm just like, these are my jokes. I get out there. I say a couple of jokes. I'm doing fine. I said something. And I just heard this boo. Like it's an aggressive thing to do.
Yeah.
In a, hey, everyone, let's support like the open micers competition, right? We're not seasoned. And it didn't throw me off, but like I wasn't ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the set was still fine. Like, there's a couple places where it was quiet. I came second, but like that split second where there was just out of this darkness, there was one boo. I was like, don't forget you live in Australia. That's what people are going to think of this.
You're not going to be thanked for what you're doing right
And, I was talking to my friend Pat about it today.
Mm.
The fact that we said white people,
just that word, like
just
the audacity
that word,
to identify
white people was considered like so incendiary. Like the reviews would be like, incendiary new comedy from. We're like, what are you talking? Like, we've grown up on like Chappelle and Chris Rock. We're like it's.
Or on white comedy, that's like, oh, Asian man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
the Indian man.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Like, yeah. It's like
So, like it was never something that we were using to be provocative or anything like that. Yeah, sure. Like,
yeah.
I
It's
was
like,
saying things that I thought were true.
This is a comedy thing from my perspective.
Yeah. And,
It's like
and,
yeah.
and I was just like, this is stuff that we find funny. Like, and for me, it was just like, I don't want white people to come and get upset. Like, I don't care if they come at all.
Right.
Like, I don't care if they're at the show. But it was received as something that was trying to be like in your face and, all this kind of stuff. So, definitely, like, there wasn't anything like it in Australia. And there was, again, I'm not saying this because, like, it's just a matter of fact. Like, it was such a tiny industry, such a tiny place that there just wasn't anyone talking about race like that in comedy in Australia in 2007 or 8. Like, there was either like very ethnic comedy or almost completely white people. So there wasn't something that was like talking about whiteness or tackling racism, or definitely nothing from also Muslim. There wasn't anything like it.
Because in America, it's one of the things where like it's one of the areas of comedy that's understood. You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, it's
like the black community has its own.
Yeah,
like there's like specifically black comedians that work for black audiences, but then there are also black comedians that have crossover stuff, but when you go there, you expect to hear something about the racial situation.
Yeah, and Jewish comedy.
Yeah.
Huge tradition.
Yes.
So the idea of minorities integrating through comedy.
Yes.
By sharing their quirks or their experiences or whatever. And that was just definitely not a thing in Australia. So,
the story for most comedians in a place where there's like a rich comedy tradition is like, man, you get on stage night after night after night after night, and it takes 15 years to, get to a place where is there an opportunity to really do that? Are those the same kind of like rites of passage that you go through in Australia? Is that what you could?
I didn't, because I went, so I did this competition thing. We did our own show, Fear of a Brown Planet, at like one of the local festivals.
How early was that? Like what? So yeah, what I'm trying to figure out is like from that early, those early competitions to the part where you're
within a year. Yeah,
that's unheard of.
I mean, I think it's different in Australia because we have that festival culture.
Okay,
where people put on shows put on a new show every year. Also, it was like at that time there was 3 of us.
Yeah.
So we were doing 10 minutes each. It wasn't like I did a brand new hour of comedy within a year of doing 5 minutes of my first stand-up. There's a lot of cushioning.
Okay.
The audience was super live. It was like our whole community.
Okay.
Like any other non-Muslim black and brown people who wanted to hear stuff about, critiquing Australia, like there was a lot of people hungry for that thing because it just didn't exist. We were selling out shows, adding extra shows. That was our entire experience until we got to Edinburgh. Edinburgh, we had to fight it out for a month. But overall, within Australia, like, you know, we had a lot of support, and we were decent comedians. Like you know, for that age and how long we've been doing comedy. But to everyone else, it was a gimmick. Like, they didn't understand, like, other comedians. You know, they were always, whether they said it or not, like, there was always kind of this thing of like, oh, well, like, your community turns up. Like, that's, you know, it's kind of this free ride you're getting. And I was like, well, your community turns up. Like, white people come to your show to hear you talk about being white. Like, what's the difference? But there was all this kind of thing of like, people could, like, it did look very strange to people that who are these guys? How is you know, how are they sold out immediately?
Yeah.
And all the festivals couldn't, like, handle 100 brown people turning up and being loud and excited. And, you know, like, there was all of this, like, very passive aggressive shit that we had to deal with in terms of, like, things that were said to our people who came to our shows, or things that were said to us about the people who came, how they were treated, how we were treated. You know, there's all, you know, all,
it's like a hostility, like a
like you don't belong here, basically.
Yeah.
Like, your people don't have experience of how to behave at a festival. Sorry, they're enjoying themselves. Like, what's
and I mean, if you look at the other, like, who does? Like, if these people are like drunk and
but it was, you know, it was. Yeah, there was all that. Like, we just didn't really necessarily fit, you know, the mold.
So how long from that first show to, I mean, so like your first viral moment was around, and like, I know there's a number of pieces, but the reverse racism. So how long from your first time on stage to reverse racism?
5 years.
Okay. So that's not overnight. I mean,
No,
that's like
no. That was 3 Fear of a Brown Planet shows.
Okay.
3 Fear of a Brown Planet shows. Yeah, 3 different festival shows. And then my solo show. And reverse racism was in my solo show. But after doing my solo show, I was just like, what? I'm just going to do like a show a year in Australia. Like, and that's when I really was kind of quitting. A lot of people don't realize that, like, comedians, a lot of them need to do something other than stand up, right? And that usually is film or TV. And there was just no opportunities. There was just nothing. So for me, I was just like, I can't, you know, and I don't do corporates either. So where was it going to go? But just back to what you were saying before about, like, doing stand up night after night. The second gig that I did after that competition, the comedian before me was making fun of Muslims. Like, just like terrible jokes about, like, having 8 wives and, like, something about Ramadan or whatever. So I got on after him and I made fun of him, but I was so angry. So people laughed at my jokes where I was making fun of him. But then I was also like, well, fuck all of you, because you were laughing at his jokes.
You laughed at this, yeah.
So I kind of, like, I couldn't let it go. And I just realized, like, I can't do that. Like, I'm not, what's the point of me, like, going to these, like, shows where there's, like, 15 white people in, like, a basement? Like, why am I going to do that? So I didn't do it. We just did festival shows.
So there wasn't really like there's not like a comedy club circuit that would be.
It's changed a lot now.
Okay.
But we're talking 16 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? And so I didn't really have that much stage time. Didn't have a lot of stage time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really doing it full time.
Because, I mean, I think one of the things about you that, so, I mean, you know, there has become this whole, you know, kind of like network of Muslim comedians that have just started, you know, to flourish in the last 5 or 10 years or so. And some of them started a little earlier than others. But most of them have gone, the ones that have actually made it have had to usually go through the white comedy structure. like the white comedy structure. And it's interesting because, so the white comedy structure is like you get on, you bomb, you get on again, you bomb, you get on again. And like you really got to like build it up. And like I said, it takes 10 years and you're getting on stage every night and you're still trying to figure out. And, it took, you hear stories about like Louis C.K. doing this like crazy, absurd stuff. He said, I was doing the same stuff for 10 years, 15 years. And then finally I just hit a point where I snapped and I just started like actually talking about my life.
What I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So like he didn't find his voice until like 15 years of living as a working stand-up comedian. The non-white, so I mostly know like black comedians. That is just not that same trajectory. It's just like you either get on stage, either you're funny to your people, or you're not. So like the people who get on stage, I mean, we look like I think I saw one of Nadira P's early first shows, maybe. You know what I mean? And she just got on stage and I was like, and I was wondering, cause like I follow her online and I think she's funny talking to the camera. I laugh every time. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, this stage is a different thing though. And she got on stage and just was so naturally funny. She didn't need all of those years on stage. There's something very like,
I mean, I could have done it. But then the material, like, I would have to have changed as a comic, right? Like to accommodate those kind of crowds.
Yeah.
I think I just realized very early on, not just what my voice was, but who I wanted to say it to.
Okay.
Right. So I just know that I want to talk to people like me.
Yeah.
And if other people want to come, that's fine. But like, I just can't go through the torture of like putting myself in front of people who don't understand me.
Yeah.
And then spending a lot of time making them understand my point. Like, it's just not, didn't want to do it.
Cause there is that thing of like the crossover, you know what I mean? So like Chappelle was master. So one of the things that he was so masterful at is
which, by the way, like, I do think it's incredible.
Yeah, I know.
Like I see comedians
Jafar.
like,
I think Jafar is getting on stage. Jafar Khan, I think he's Jafar Khan. I think he's getting on stage at like white people comedy clubs.
Yeah, or
and
like
figuring out how to deliver. Like,
or Samuel Bade. He's a Palestinian comic.
Yes. Okay.
Like I see videos of him in front of like openly hostile white crowds.
Yeah.
And he's talking about Palestine.
Yeah.
Like that's a different skill. You know what I mean? Like, and that's so I'm not like, oh, you know, if you go and do this stuff, like you're a sellout or whatever. I just knew like I couldn't do it. Like that's not what I wanted to do.
Well, you don't want to. Like, is it because of like what you would have to endure psychologically?
It's what I would have to endure.
Yeah.
And also, I know what I want to say. So I just want to say it to the people who are going to get it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
If I do that, like I'm going to have to change it. Maybe it'll still be good. Maybe it'll still be funny.
I mean, but I think that is, well, I mean, yeah, and it really gets down to what your intention is. Because I've shared this with you. You know what I mean? But I'm like, man, if you were to take your stuff, and I mean, even for the Muslim comedians, like you're something of like a MF Doom to the Muslim comedians where it's just like, man, this guy is too good. It's not even fair.
Who says that? No one says that.
Yes, the hell they very do. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I'm not going to tell you their names on the mic, but I'm saying, yes, they do.
Okay.
Like I'm saying, it's known that like, man, we got to get out here and work and develop this stuff, and they're all helping each other write, and they're all, you know what I mean? And, you know, you seem to come out of nowhere, like come out of retirement and just drop all this genius stuff. You know what I mean? That did not go through the fire of the comedy club circuit for several years to be able to get to it. It
did go through the fire of a couple of nights in London that you did not witness.
True, but I'm saying, but that's still nothing compared. Like, so, okay, for most people, like I saw Mo. Mo is the comedian that I was like watched in the trenches for the longest period of time. Like I saw him do what ended up being his first Vagabond special. I saw him do that material for 10 years. In all over the world, in comedy clubs, opening for Dave, in Muslim events, at the Comedy Cellar, and I saw him like craft every little second, so much that like he did some of it on TV one time, and I know the differences, the little nuanced differences between that and how he did it on his special versus how he did it one night when I saw him do it in Boston. You know what I'm saying? Like, you see what a lot of comedians go through to deliver those things. You are able to come off the bench almost and deliver something at such a pristine level. That's a very unique, very special thing. And as somebody that knows you and loves you, I always wonder, what would this become? You know what I mean? Like, what type of, you come in with that type of potency, what would this become if he got up every night like the rest of the comedians did and had to, you know what I mean? It's like, what would Doom be if he, you know, and Doom did have to spit in the cypher as a kid. But when Doom came out with Operation Doomsday On, it's not like Doom is freestyling outside of the record store anymore. Yeah. It's like he's a guy who shows up in a mask and delivers something flawless, and then he disappears until the next time he pops out.
I think knowing my audience, like knowing who my audience are, and my audience is very political.
Yeah.
It's a kind of freedom where I know they're going to understand
a
bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So I can basically just write it for myself. Like, that's the psychology of it. I don't have to be like, oh, then the audience is not going to get this idea with this idea. I can just really write it as if I'm listening to it. And I don't have to change it too much. And my audience is that in sync with the ideas and the topic and all that kind of stuff that it lands. So it's kind of a short circuit in a way. And at the same time, it helps to maintain the integrity of it. And by integrity, I mean, like, it doesn't have to be watered down or changed too much. I mean, the stuff that I've put out about Palestine now, I could take that to clubs for a year. It just wouldn't get the same response, right? Like, people would either be in shock or just not understand. Like, sometimes people just wouldn't understand. They just wouldn't get, you know, like the one plate solution and stuff like that. Like, people are not familiar with it. They're not going to get it, right? And then what would happen to me? I'd be like, oh, these jokes suck. Like, these jokes are not landing. I got to tweak it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's something about being the advantage for me of having, like, very loyal supporters.
Yeah.
Is that it helps me write in a certain way and it lands in a certain way. And I think the power of social media is that when you watch the video and people are laughing, you're like, oh, that is funny. And the same people watching it on the screen may not have found it funny in a club.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that, so I went the first night. I went 2 nights when you were, like, filming those. And the first night I went, it was like me and
Brother Ali flew to London from Istanbul.
Okay, so
watch this.
This is
shout
a
out
longer,
Zia.
Yeah.
Shout out Ahmed Fahmy. Shout out Jamali, who came from Chicago. My cousin who flew from New York. It was that was incredible to me.
What's the tall brother's name that filmed it?
Ruben. I mean, Ruben. Like, that's. Can I?
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's go back to reverse racism.
Yeah.
So I thought I was quitting.
Yeah, you're always quitting.
I'm always quitting. You know that expression?
The greats are always quitting. Yassine is always quitting.
You know how people are quiet quitting from their jobs? No. It's where you don't announce it. You just start working slower and slower until, like, you disappear.
Yeah. Great artists are always quitting.
So,
Jay-Z has always been quitting. Yassine is always quitting. Everyone's always, yeah.
So at one of the last Fear of a Brown Planet shows, my friend Ruben turned up to film an interview with us for something else. And then he had the equipment and he had another assistant there with another camera. He's like, hey, I'm here. This is a nice auditorium. This is the Athenaeum Theatre in Melbourne. Just an amazing venue. He filmed the whole thing kind of by accident and out of his own generosity. So when I was quitting, like normally you don't put up clips that you're going to tour with.
Right.
But I was just like, well, where am I touring? Like, I'm not just going to 3 cities in Australia for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So I pulled out 3 clips, the Osama bin Laden one, reverse racism, and something, I can't even remember the third one. I just put them online. Then that went viral. It was on Twitter, was just kind of woke. Twitter was just starting then.
Man.
The good old days.
Yeah. I mean, I just had Tim Wise on. So like, yeah, Tim Wise's viral moments and your viral moments were like right around the same time. Yeah.
And so, that opened, that led to me doing like the US and Canada and touring the UK again and all that kind of stuff. So then when I was quitting again in 2017, just before I moved to Turkey, I was like, okay, I'm quitting, but I'll just do one last set. So I used
Black Album.
So I used to do a set at a place called Political Asylum, where a night that my friends ran, which was political comedy.
Right.
So again, I was like, you know what? I can do the material I want to do. Crowd's gonna get it.
Yeah.
Again, it was on the same street that Ruben's studio's on, Sydney Road. I was like, hey, Ruben, do you mind like filming this? Ruben films it, and I had the punch a Nazi joke in there.
Yeah.
Which, again, I was like, well, I'm quitting. Let me.
That was your first time doing that.
That was the one and only time I've ever done that joke.
See, that's what I'm saying. That's not fair.
And that's never happened again, by the way. That didn't happen with any of his Palestine material.
But all of those things. No, but I'm saying, like, for you to come on stage, the Palestine material you did for 1 week.
True.
And it's perfect.
No, that Nazi joke, that was the one and only time.
That's Jay-Z walking in the booth going, turn me up. It's good for the culture. Like, I'm saying that's what that is, right? I'm saying that's like you walk in and like deliver that perfectly, flawlessly, off the top of your head. That's Jay-Z level political comedy.
No,
and you are the only
off the top. Like I had thought it out.
Yes, but I'm saying like it's not written. It
was not written.
No,
I
know that you don't write your stuff. Like you walk around and you say it to yourself, and then you say it to your sister, maybe.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Walk around the street like
your wife is not impressed.
She wasn't. To date, I don't think she's managed to pick any of the bangers. Like,
yeah. But I mean, to just basically walk in like Jay-Z, deliver something that flawlessly, you know what I mean, and then just be like, yeah, that was cool. Well, that's not something that that's not normal.
It's not normal, but so I know a lot of comedians, and they have a lot of other skills that I don't have.
Okay,
like a lot of
like what, impressions?
No, like
props. What are we talking?
Like stamina, like being able to like get through a set.
I will say like you don't see it in no set, but I'm saying like the one thing about seeing you come off of being retired for like 6 years and then come in, like you did have the, and you called it work in progress, so like people knew.
The notes, not even the notes, but I'm saying like I get thrown very easily. Like, but again, we're also talking about like I did comedy for a week, like.
Yes.
But there's a lot of muscles I don't have that the people who do it every night have. Okay. Even just memorizing the stuff, you know what I mean? Like I really needed those notes, But like other people can, they can chop and change.
But did you have like actual bullet points of the jokes, or you just had the names of the bits?
Yeah, like the names of the bits, or like the bits of the bits. Sections, but not like sentences or anything like that. I mean, it's just not possible to read that fast.
So you had like only democracy in the Middle East.
Yeah,
like that. Okay.
I would have like only democracy, Karen, something. Like the main chunks, because some of them were long. This is all back to Ruben. So drop punch a Nazi, it goes viral. So when I decided to do this, I was like, I can't do it without Ruben, and also Ruben and I like he's an incredible friend.
Yeah,
And he's just a highly capable person. Like, he can handle lighting, sound. He's just the kind of person you can trust with everything.
So Ruben, for people that don't know, is like a 7 feet tall,
7 feet.
like really tall, white Australian brother who married a Lebanese lady.
A Lebanese woman, yes.
And did he convert? Did he like convert and then get married right away like we all do, or did he convert to marry her? I think he converted to marry her.
I don't know. I don't
No?
think so, because I remember Ruben saying he was looking through religions, and Islam was the last one he was looking through.
Okay.
So he was already on this journey. But I think he got married pretty soon after.
Okay. I mean, we all
Yeah.
do. It's
Yeah.
like you get married and then you convert to Islam, and then most people get married if they're not already. So, okay. And then also Ruben, his story somehow got recorded, his like conversion story.
Ruben's conversion story
and
is also
became viral on its own.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was filming like some conference, and they asked him to speak, and he gets up, and Ruben is very funny and charismatic. He gives this funny speech about how he converted, and you'll find it on the internet at random times being like, white Australian converts to Islam. Like, it doesn't have his name on it.
It never has a name. That's one of the things I see with Tim Wise. It'll be like, white man tells the truth about whatever.
My videos right now.
Oh.
They have my name on it because they're getting ripped. Listen, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. But, there's that part of you as an artist to be like, hey, that's me. Like, there's one person in the comments who's like, please credit the artist. I'm liking that comment.
Man, so many of them will just screen record your thing or download it or whatever and repost it and never give credit to the person.
People literally put their name on it. And people have like signatures. Like a couple of times people just take in my video and put their signature on it. I'm like, I'm sorry, for what? Like
their little stamp at the bottom?
Yeah, like their little logo or whatever. I'm like, you don't feel weird doing this? Like,
I mean, and there's entire accounts that's all it is.
Yeah.
No, it's hell. Like,
look, because you're one of the few people that I talked about this whole thing with before I did it, is like my intention was like to make something that's useful. It wasn't like to get back into a career, as much as I'm sure there's parts of me that wanted that, but the intention was for that to happen. So every time I see it get ripped and it has like a TikTok, like they ripped it from Twitter before I could even post like the version that I made for TikTok. And it went viral. And then when I tried to post it to my own account, like no one cared. But that's just ego. I'm just like, listen, people like it, people see it. Like the whole point of this is to make this normal, to make criticism of Zionism normal. Right. That's why comedy is so dangerous, because it can normalize something like that. And that can be good. It can be good in the sense that, hey, like, this is not something we have to tiptoe around. Zionism, ludicrous. Like, this is a racist, supremacist thing. We're allowed to make fun of it. We're allowed to call it unacceptable. But it could also be like, hey, look at these people. Aren't they weird? Like the guy who was making fun of Muslims before me on that night. Like, in an instant, for that whole room, it's normal and okay and not a problem to dehumanize people. So yeah, that's what the mission was. So I call Ruben. I'm like, I can't do this without you. What dates are you free? And Ruben and I have this joke. Have you seen The Town? Ben Affleck?
No. So
Ben Affleck and his friends are bank robbers in Boston. Someone harasses like the girl that he likes. And he turns up to his friend's house and he's like, I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, hey, we're going to go hurt some people. You can never ask me why, and we're never going to talk about it again. And then his friend goes, whose car are we taking? So that's mine and Ruben's like running joke. It's like, whose car are we taking? Like, there's no questions asked. Like, we're doing it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he came to London with me and, just handled everything.
one of the things we talk about so often on this podcast, and it came up in this conversation, is therapy. Music is a big part of what we do. The spiritual path is a big part of what we do, talking about what's going on in the world. And I mean, really, all of this big phenomenon of podcasts are because people feel alone and they want to hear other people talk through their stuff together. And one of the really brilliant and beautiful ways to do that is therapy. It's not always easy to find the right therapist. And I don't live in America. I don't have a job. I don't have insurance. My wife's a therapist. I'm in my 40s. I've always known I needed therapy. You know what I mean? I'm a hopefully recovering knucklehead that was like, man, I need some therapy. I've known that for a long time. But man, that joint is scary. And so for me, I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to the Talking Sopranos podcast. And every time they talked about BetterHelp. And so I was able to go through that process. You tell them a little bit about why you want to be in therapy, what type of therapist you want. If you want somebody from your community or your background, you can tell them that. And then you make your own schedule, like with your therapist. You decide if you want to talk on the phone, if you want to have your camera on. And if you ever want to change your therapist, and I'm telling you, change your therapist. Like if you're talking to somebody, you don't have to tell them everything right away. Wait and let them make you trust them. Make you feel seen, heard, understood. And then you can start sharing stuff with them. And if you go a session or two and it doesn't feel like a match, change your therapist. They're there to help you. And BetterHelp makes that really easy to do. So if you go to BetterHelp, BetterHelp.com/travelers, you'll get a discount when you start. And we also get a commission that helps the work that we do here. People talk about it a lot. And honestly, I hope that we keep on talking about it until people get some therapy. Put that in there with exercising, put that in there with praying and meditating and being in community and going outside and eating right and all the other good things. Having a person that we can talk to and just show up and be toxic at them for an hour if that's what you feel like you need to do. It's something that everybody deserves access to. So we're grateful to have this relationship with BetterHelp because they're bringing therapy to the people. When I came to Istanbul 3 and some change years ago, like I've been from the time that, so I mean, like we were friends before this, and we had some like, we had some like really important life moments together. But I was like, okay, part of me being here is I want to be the cheerleading section and the support for you getting back into comedy.
Oh man.
I mean, you know that. I told you from the beginning, I'm like, we need you doing comedy. And when you do, I'm there. You know what I mean? And we had this conversation. I was very, I was like, man, you got to respect people's time and all that kind of
you
stuff.
were not pushy about it at all.
No, but if there was ever an opening, if you ever be like, yeah, I don't know about, the day job is kind of whatever and da-da-da. I'm like, that's because you're really supposed to be, like, you are a masterful comedian. Like, that's what you are. And, yeah, man, there was never really an opening until this particular moment. You were hoping that some of the other comedians, whether it be the Muslim comedians, other, justice kind of oriented comedians, like you were looking for other people to say the things that you had in your mind to say.
Yeah, because, like, me, like with you, like we're very, very close friends. I'm still a fan.
Yeah.
I still ask you like dumb fan questions. Like I have no problem being a fan of people that I know, other comedians. Like I'll send people a message. I love your work, like which comedians just don't do. You know what I mean? Like there's so much weirdness, but I'm like, I would have gladly shared and been a cheerleader for people if they said the things that I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
But it just was not happening.
Yeah.
And after a certain point, you realize, okay, it's not going to happen. Like if you haven't said it by now, whatever calculation someone's made, like they're not going to say it.
It really was this particular moment. And we were together on October 7th with Sena Saeed, you know what I mean, the great reporter.
Just having a picnic. Just having a picnic.
She just happened to be in town. We were having a picnic. Yeah, like literally we had a picnic with our kids, eating chicken wings and stuff in the park. And I remember that like because I don't pay attention to the news. And I remember it was just a very kind of like vague conversation, like something crazy happened today. You know what I mean? And I remember thinking like, oh, really? Like, what? You know what I mean? Something happened? What happened? You know? And then I got home and was like, oh, this is, you know what I mean? And so then I could see with you that like the clock was running. You know what I mean? And your genuine hope was that the people who were out in the field, the people who had built names for themselves from having a hot take on what was happening politically, the people who, you know, had created, like their brand is, I make comedy about things you're not supposed to make comedy about. You know, I speak from the perspective of an oppressed, marginalized person who's demonized under the current, you know, climate of like anti-Muslim fear, or, you know, just comedians who this is their focus in general. And I mean,
comedians, actors, like
musicians.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is amazing how effectively almost no one has actually taken this subject on.
No, I mean, if we're being honest, like it's really like a lot of new content creators or people who were not content creators before, who have stepped up to fill in like the gap. You know?
Yeah.
Just organizers who now have found themselves becoming content creators.
Right.
But I'm saying, like, for me, it was just like, what has everyone been working towards?
Yes.
Like I never built like a big platform, but if I did, what is the goal?
Right.
The goal is to one day cash that check for something.
And if it's not going to be now, then what?
Then never.
If it's not like a 4K genocide that you watch every single time you go on, like we're all signing on to these same, everybody is watching the same scroll and the same feed.
Yeah, you don't need to go somewhere to find out about
it.
It's there.
It's you know, like everybody is seeing this. And so, yeah, man, it's just mind-boggling, like how many of the people that we knew that were like, I'm going to get a seat at the table and I'm going to, you know, and I mean, and some of us have had these conversations, you know what I mean? In hip hop, it's always been that. In hip hop, it's always like, okay, if we're going to go into the mainstream, like we're going, especially from the people that were raised like us, you know what I mean? But like, you know, there was a number of, you know, people that just kind of broke into, whether we want to call it Hollywood or entertainment or the arts or whatever, that were like, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to represent for us. You know what I mean? It's going to be this representation thing. And then
I don't want to hear that word again. You know what I mean? I'm just like,
and you very specifically were very supportive of those people.
Always. Yeah.
Whether you knew them directly or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying representation is not important,
right?
But like,
that's one of the bits. It's like representation is important,
but like, it's time to represent,
right?
And if you're not going to represent now, then it doesn't. It's like it's meaningless.
Yeah,
I don't just want to see brown people on TV and in movies.
If can't,
when something like this happens, you can't leverage that. You're not willing to risk that to say you're on our side,
right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah. When it's crazy,
and you know what? It's not, you know, people haven't done nothing, but they've done what to me seems like a very calculated minimum. So you can't say they haven't done anything, but at the same time, I'm just like, this is weak. This is very, very weak.
And I mean, we're talking about the bar being as low as like, yes, okay, so Saul Williams, who is amazing poet, has always been a voice for social justice, for causes of all kinds. You know what I mean? But I mean, for Saul Williams to be this is somebody that we knew because we were into hip hop and poetry and things like that in the 90s. You know what I mean? And so for Saul Williams to be one of the leading voices in this thing, you know, so Saul created this piece that like folks will share.
Yeah.
It's like, look what Saul Williams said.
Not my name. Yeah.
Yeah, not in my name.
And he posts, like, I think it's all he posts now.
Yeah, and I mean, like, he really is, like, I would say him and Amanda Seales and, like, you know, a few other people are directly in the front lines.
Yes.
Like, they are, you know, the like, that is the, like, Black American equivalent or, like, the hip-hop equivalent of, you know, and obviously like, you know, Bissam and Motaz and like these people in that are actually on the ground there. But like those are the people that we go to for like what's going on. Like Saul will post a slot, like he'll go and basically
curate like an entire day's worth of content.
Like this is all the dope stuff that I've seen today, or these are the important things for today. And you can go to him and he's basically curating a news feed for you. You know, and so to repost something that Saul said, but like the bar being as low as like turning on your phone and looking into the thing and saying, this is anything.
This is what I stand for.
This is genocide. This is apartheid. This is whatever. You know what I mean? Like we've just not seen.
No, I'm just saying you're creative. You are a creative, but you haven't created anything about this. You've shared things, or you share letters or petitions or someone else's content, but how in this amount of time you haven't created, like you said, a video of yourself. I'm not asking for a feature film. Right. But just something that says, this is the side that I'm on.
You know, it's interesting, like we were just talking about, like, you know, this whole thing with Jerry Seinfeld, where Jerry Seinfeld just went on and Jerry Seinfeld's brand is like, it's not political. That's so stupid. We're not important. It doesn't matter. Like, stop talking to me about, okay, yeah, whatever, you're black, you know. It's like the Comedians in Cars thing. Chris Rock's one of his best friends, and Chris Rock was saying like, oh yeah, this guy really inspired me. And Jerry's like, so is someone black? And Chris is like, well, I'm black. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like he's always really like poo-pooed that whole thing.
Just very threatened by the idea of it.
Yes, and and it's part of his like mission statement that like comedy is about Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, I don't care about your race, your gender, whatever people, baggage you want to bring.
Yeah, leave your people out of this. It's just, are you funny? You know what I mean? And meanwhile, like, you're best friends with Chris Rock. Yeah. You know what I mean? And somehow the whole, like, I don't see race, you know what I mean? Until October 7th, and now suddenly it's petitions and it's like...
Or his wife funding, like, the counter-protesters beating up students at UCLA.
And on a certain level, it's very strange, but on a certain level, I can understand somebody just riding with their people no matter what. I don't respect it, but I understand it. Especially when there is a reality where your people have been targets. And it's hard sometimes to see like, well, where is this actual threat coming from? There is a certain level where I understand that. But it's like, okay, man, but you know, at what point do you just see, like, with the exception of Yasin Bey, with the exception of like a very small number of hip hop artists of people who this is what we're here to do. This is who we are.
And there's also, you know, there's this, like I said, there's this kind of, there's a way around it of just treating it as a humanitarian disaster. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't, like, Gaza wasn't hit by a tornado.
Right.
Like, there is a state doing this.
Yes, yeah.
You got to name the perpetrators.
It's not the earthquake.
Okay? Yes. We're not, like, you're not going to talk about a genocide without naming the people doing it, funding it, executing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, which is why, you know, that whole All Eyes on Rafah thing upsets so many people. Mm-hmm. It's just like, this is a contextless, artificial image that is not, you know, the real horrors are right there. They're not hidden.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And this doesn't say anything about who's doing it to who.
Right. Yeah. 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 And I mean, you know, to be fair, it's also interesting that like people have spoken up on so many issues, you know, but this seems to be the one issue where literally the doors will immediately close. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm seeing that. Like, you know, I've been on the outs with the industry many, many times. I've been on the outs with my fan base many, many times. You know what I mean? Like, I've definitely had major moments where like, this is all my heart cares about right now. So this is what we're going to be talking about. Even things that, you know, my organizing, whatever. I've seen big major dips in my following multiple times in my career. And like, but you know, and people are always like, people in my comments are like, who are these people that don't know that this is who Brother Ali is? You know what I mean? I have never seen I've never had the doors closed completely like they have with this time. You know what I'm saying? And I've been talking about Palestine for years. Like I was made a song basically sympathizing with someone who blows themselves up in a major motion picture, but about Jimmy Carter. And I remember the person that was booking me at that time was a very powerful Jewish booking agent. And he called me, and he never called me. It was always his assistant talking to my manager. He called me directly. I think it was only the 2 times we've talked on the phone. He re-signed me one time after I had been with another agent. But one of 2 phone conversations we had, he was like, I just want you to know that you being part of this movie about Jimmy Carter and the song you made, the people who talk about these things are talking about you. You're on their radar. Wow. And I was like, okay, well, how do you feel about that? He's like, listen, man, I love representing people that are trouble. He's like, I love representing Immortal Technique and Wu-Tang Clan and whatever. He's like, I argue. That's what I do. Like, I'm a junkyard dog. I'll argue with my people. I'll argue with anybody. Everybody knows that about me. But he's like, but you should know that everything else you've done has been understood. Like, yeah, there's these political rappers. This one in particular has reached people. This is different. And he's like, I'm telling you, I don't do it. Say whatever you want. Like, the more controversial, the better. But he's like, I think you need to know that this is different. And man, this particular, because we've been talking through it the whole time, but like, going from performing at the biggest festivals, it's one thing to say like, okay, I've been living in Istanbul for 3 years. I'm not the new hot thing anymore. Maybe it's going to be lower level profile stuff, but I'm talking about, I'm talking about 0 festivals. I'm talking about like the biggest hip hop and reggae festivals. Like, there's no hip hop. The hip hop festivals aren't like that anymore. The biggest reggae festivals to nothing. Rolling Stone, not Rolling Stone to like some random blog. Rolling Stone to nothing. Like the 100 to 0 drop of it. Yeah. And then even just being able to like, Instagram is the only, even social media. I got 500,000 people on social media. Instagram's the only one I get any engagement at all, where posts will be seen by anybody. It's and so to be fair, I understand. You know what I mean? Like, to be fair, I do understand why a lot of our folks that are in these positions, they had to work hard to get there. They had to work harder than anybody else. They are the Jackie Robinson in a lot of ways. Like, this is a Jackie Robinson generation for like Muslims in Hollywood, the and first, brown people in Hollywood and stuff. Yeah, the first. They're the Obama, But at the same time, I'm like, man, if it's not going to be this, then also like, what does the generation coming behind you have to look at? You know what I'm saying? Like, who can they look at and say, well, like, that's what it looked like when Uncle so-and-so did it. And also, all of y'all, like, we're in WhatsApp groups with a lot of these guys and people. It's like, what would happen if all of them, you know what I mean? What would happen if all of us were to take a united stand? Yeah. Because somebody would have to notice that, like, okay, for this to be happening, so like, I'm doing this and I don't have another rapper I can even call. There's not another rapper that I can be like, yo, what are we going to do now? Can we throw a festival now? You know what I'm saying? There's not that's putting out new music. So like Immortal Technique and Dead Prez and Yassine Bey and like, but who has a new album out this year like I do? There's not another rapper. Like Sage Francis is always going to be Sage Francis. You know what I'm saying? Like, I love these people, Saul, but like, I'm still trying to be viable. Like, I started my own record label and I put out a thing that's got Rock Marciano on it, and like, I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to make a push for it. There's not another rapper to call. You know what I'm saying? And so like, for you to drop into it, it's like you're one of one.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that also, like, I was kind of motivated to do it out of frustration. Yeah. But it's also left such a kind of bitter taste in my mouth. Yeah. To just know that, like, there's not many people willing, and it's not that there's no one. There are people, but honestly, it's people with smaller platforms,
Right.
who could be wiped away a lot more easily.
Yes.
That are speaking up.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the bigger the platform you have, like I know people think, oh, I have more to lose. You also have a lot more insulation.
Yes.
You've got fans that will be up in arms if something happens to you.
Yes.
Right? Like you have to know that that's a position of strength.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, man. Like it really makes me kind of very jaded about like, I don't want to be alone. You know, I want to be in a community of people doing something.
Right. Yes.
And I did these comedy shows not because I think like my magic comedy is going to change like the tide of this genocide. It's because we are in like this completely unprecedented moment where it's no longer taboo to question Zionism. I mean, it's still mostly taboo, but there is a window, even if it's tiny, that didn't exist.
Absolutely.
There's a crack in the dam.
Yes.
Okay? So everyone needs to push. Everyone needs to push at the same time. There's not going to be another opportunity like this. You miss it now, you missed it. And that's going to be on your name forever, really. Like, I'm sorry. So everyone's got to do their tiny bit, you know?
All of our heroes are people like Dr. King and Muhammad Ali. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're like the real reason that Muhammad Ali is so beloved is because when the military industrial complex was completely off limits, you know what I mean? Muhammad Ali, famously, and personally was like, take my title, put me in front. You know what I mean? They're like, we might put you in jail, and he said, get a firing squad out here.
Yeah.
He's like, never mind jail, like get a firing squad out here. I'm ready to die for my beliefs.
And made the most dangerous connection, which was the military-industrial complex abroad and the brutality at home.
Yeah. Yes.
And that, joining those two ideas is something the United States cannot tolerate.
And it's pretty obvious that that's where, like, when Dr. King did it, it's like, okay, time to go. And when Dr. King did it, I mean, at the end of his life, like now we talk about both of these guys, like, man, those are my heroes, but when Dr. King drew that connection, that's when it's like, okay, now you got to die. And his approval ratings in America were extremely low.
Yeah.
Like Dr. West always points out, they were lower than George Bush when he left office.
They were not popular.
People did not like Dr. King when he was killed because of drawing that specific connection. It feels to me like, all this conversation about from people like us that are like underground artists. There's always this critique that like, man, when people are selling out, but it feels really obvious to me in this particular moment.
I think because the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
The scenario is so extreme.
And because people see it. It's like, as an artist, it's one thing for the conscious artist that like we have to try to introduce entirely new concepts to people that like they never heard of. So like you said, like, or like we were talking about when we were talking about Palestine a year ago, people were just like, what is, the people have always been fighting in the Middle East. It's been going on forever. You know what I mean? Like for us to talk about the Nakba, people had no idea what the Nakba was. Absolutely, completely unknown unless you were a professor of whatever or a Muslim. And now for people to know what that is, you know what I mean? Like for so long, we've been trying to introduce concepts to people that they didn't understand. Now everybody sees it, and we can't even talk about it. Like my booking agent was just like, we were just talking about this, and she was like, the public's on your side. The industry's not on your side, but the public's on your side, and this isn't. She basically was saying this isn't going to be forever. Like eventually, people are going to have to catch up because now the public knows. You know what I mean? This is my Jewish booking agent saying this to me, who cannot get me a festival this year. she's like, this isn't going to be forever because the public's on your side. You know what I mean? Like, public opinion is on your side. We can't have artists that are talking about this even when everybody sees it, even when everybody knows it. It's like, what has all this been for? What is all of this cultural stuff? And we're saying like, and what does all this talk about? Comedians specifically, you know, the comedy club is sacred ground because this is the one place where we're allowed.
We're fearless. Nothing's off limits. It's like, okay, well, why are you so quiet now?
Yeah.
Nothing to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one thing if we're attacking the woke mob, you know what I mean?
So for me, it's like both sides. So there's like the woker progressive side who are telling truth to power. I'm like, now's a good time.
Yeah.
Now's a really good time to tell truth to power.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side of like, nothing's off limits, nothing's sacred. We can talk about anything. And, you know, also crickets.
Like the whole thing about comedy is, and hip hop. And honestly, it's like one of the things that like, you know, I came up in hip hop. And one of the things they have in common is that it's always been understood that there's going to be a person with a microphone saying things we're not supposed to say. You know what I mean? And all comedians and hip hop artists, especially if you are a person of conscience, you've probably said something on the microphone that now you wish you hadn't said, but you knew that like the whole energy and the electricity around these art forms is that somebody's going to say something kind of dangerous. You know what I mean? And like I came up as a battle rapper. Like I found out they're doing a documentary about Scribble Jam. And I'm just like, I feel like those people must have felt like when they announced they're doing a documentary about Freaknik.
Yes.
Where it's just like, no,
please don't.
Like the whole thing, like the idea that we were all being recorded was not part of the public. Was not part of the public contract at that time. You know what I mean? Like we knew the battles were recorded and I said stuff in those battles that I'm just like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like when I was choking in a battle, like, man, I've said stuff that I'm just like, and I never would say that in any other circumstance, but it's like, man, you know, and not to make excuses, but it was like part of the reality of that thing. So like, we've got these art forms where all of us have said all kind of stuff, you know what I mean? And they're built around, okay, and the reason that we keep going so often and what we tell ourselves and tell other people and, you know, tell the world and like, it's kind of a justification, but it's like, yeah, this is an opportunity for me to say things that no one else is allowed to say. You know what I mean?
Or say them my way.
But it feels like, have the people that criticized us this whole time and said we shouldn't be doing these dirty art forms, you know what I mean? Like, are the music is haram people? Are they just right? Because like, here we are. Here we are. All these gangsters, you know what I mean? All these like moguls, all these people with awards and all these accolades and all this kind of stuff. Like, here we are. You know what I mean? And the people that you find, it's like, where? So like Macklemore and Susan Sarandon are like, those are only people that, you know what I mean?
The faces, yeah.
I mean, you know, and I remember like back in the day talking to you about like, man, why don't you get into comedy clubs and this, and you're just like, I don't want to be there. You know?
Because, you know, the crowd is one thing. Other comedians, like that's part of the equation as well.
Right.
You know, and I think, you know, I started so late, like relatively. I was like 26 when I started. So I already had friends. I already had like
community.
I already had I knew what I was interested in. I knew what I wanted to talk about. I think much younger comedians are trying to make friends. You know,
they're trying to find their tribe.
Yeah, so you're gonna tolerate more, or you're younger. You don't have like certain boundaries anymore. The first show I did backstage, one of the comedians was complaining that he had gone to a gig at a school dressed in blackface as a joke, and he was upset that the teacher at the school got upset and he was just like, yeah, she just didn't get it. I was like, well, where am I?
Yeah.
I can't sit around with these people and like pretend that their set was funny or like laugh along in that conversation. I was like, I'll lose my mind.
Yeah.
So that, that's the other part of it. It's just like, I want to be in a place where like
Yeah.
I respect people.
You've been releasing these clips, and one of the things about them that I think is so special is that like you are also a media person. Like you also like you edit those clips yourself. I don't know if people realize that.
Yeah, I edit them, and then Ruben, we go back and forth.
Yeah.
I do a rough cut, then Ruben cleans it up, then he sends it back to me, and we kind of go back and forth.
But I mean, like they function. Some of them are just straight stand-up comedy clips, but some of them function as like stand-up along with a document, like a mini documentary almost.
Yeah.
And like I don't know if people necessarily realize that that's you
Right.
crafting those.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the one about Joe Biden was like,
yeah.
Like how do you source that stuff? Like, do you keep a running like database of all of these things so that when you need them?
If it's like something racist that someone did, I never forget it.
Yeah.
I never. But then I have to go and find it.
Yeah.
I gotta go find it. So like that Joe Biden, the Biden stuff happened because, who he is in that early part of his career is just a different person too. Like he's lethal.
Yes.
Like he used to be a lawyer. Like he's very like commanding. Like on the floor of Congress or Senate or wherever he is. Like he's super articulate.
Yeah.
He's saying like extremely dangerous racist things with a lot of confidence, making him sound like good ideas. And you could talk about it, but when you see the footage of it,
right?
When you see him like thumping the lectern and being like more cops, more prisons, like I was like, people need to see that.
Yeah.
Like it's not enough just for me to like be like, well, what Joe Biden did in the 80s? No, like take a look. Like this is, he's saying those people. We know who he's talking about.
Yeah. He's
talking about putting black people in prison. Like that is explicitly what he's saying, and the legislation he's trying to pass. So, yeah, that's I sat through like I found an old documentary that was in, and then I saw that like the rough date at the bottom. Then I went to C-SPAN, and C-SPAN has like all of those congressional hearings recorded, and there's like a 5-hour congressional hearing where he's talking about Iraq that I just like scanned through all the bits that he was speaking till I found the parts where he's like, it'll be worth it if we can, if we get this done right in Iraq, it'll be worth it, which is like an echo of Madeleine Albright saying on 60 Minutes, 500,000 dead Iraqi children, the price is worth it. So these things, it's just so different when you see it happening,
Yeah, and I mean, it's like really this like
it's like the Tulsa documentary.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's like you know it, but then when you see it, you're like, wow, like you said that in an interview that you knew was going to be televised around the world.
Yeah,
you said 500,000 dead Iraqi children. It's okay.
Yeah, and so seeing the way that you put those clips together is something that's just extremely powerful.
And also, look, I'm not bound by any kind of format. It's not a special. Like, it's I call it a mixtape because when you don't have the money to put out an album, put out a mixtape. And then after a while, I was like, I can kind of do whatever I want. You know, like what? And I did think like, oh, like do people have everything now is about like making something as short as possible, or I was like, are people gonna have the patience for this stuff? But I think like those clips people have responded to the most.
Another thing that's so special is that I remember when you started posting those, I feel silly now because I was like, here are some of the things I've been learning about social media. You should do that. But I'm saying like there was such a void that you were feeling and such a thirst for what you were doing and such a hunger for it that like you also, not only did you come off the bench from comedy and like just jump in and nail this stuff, but really in social media, like you very rarely post on social media, you know what I'm saying? But then also like you jump directly in, and I mean, all of those clips are extremely viral, extremely successful. You know what I mean? Where there's like people that teach courses on like how to build your following up to that point. What's been your experience like in terms of posting those things, like, where they've gone, who you've seen repost them and comment on them? Like, what's that part been like?
Yeah, I again, like going into it, I was just like, okay, worst case scenario, like no one cares, the clips don't go anywhere, but at least I know that I tried to do something. So, I've always been prepared for it to like not circulate. And sometimes it doesn't immediately circulate. Sometimes it takes a day, and then because of one particular account sharing it, it'll go viral. But I think it just proves that like people want that kind of content, and I think if I described it to people ahead of time, oh, I'm gonna do comedy and then I'm gonna cut in like documentary footage or whatever. The number one thing most people would have said to me is too long. 4 minutes, 6 minutes. Who's gonna watch it? But I think because it's new stuff. Not new, like it happened a long time ago, but like people just haven't seen it. Like it's a new, and it gives context to what they're seeing now.
I mean, also it's the strength of the art, like the strength of it as comedy, the way that it's written. I'm saying, like, man, like they say that like comedians are being like, people are reassessing every 7 seconds. Like, am I going to keep watching this? Is this funny? Do I believe this person? You know what I mean? Like, it also goes to the strength of the material itself as masterful stand-up comedy. You know what I mean? That like every single line is in place, every word is in place, every pause is in place. Because it takes a lot for a person to continually buy, especially when you can just scroll. You know what I mean?
And a lot of those bits are slow.
Yes.
They're not snappy social media zingers. Like,
yes. Yeah.
The Gal Gadot thing. Because, like I sometimes I go to Reddit or like, I have like a Google alert for my name, like set up for years. And the comments are hilarious. People are like, it took 2.5 minutes for me to get to a punchline. Or, like, I didn't know what this was. Because especially in vertical, like there's no audience. So people are like, I just saw a guy with a microphone wearing like street clothes talking. I didn't know this was comedy for like 35 seconds. But it's still circulating.
Yeah. Is the clothes, like, are people talking about the clothes? Like, that's a thing?
No, only like 1 in every 75 comments is just like doom. Because of the Doom sweatshirt, or like, I don't care, I just want to know where to get this Doom shirt.
Oh man, you know what? A lot of the stuff that we've shot, so like we're filming this with JJ, who's like filmed like all the stuff I posted, people are just like, love that shirt.
Yeah, they want great choices all the time.
Yeah, but I'm just like, my eyes are up here, people. You know what I mean? But I'm just like, I'm rapping my heart out. Or people would be like, where can I buy that shirt? Yeah. And I'm literally sitting here spitting you verses from my new album that like my
pouring out my heart and soul
that my distributor just dropped.
Like, what's the Amazon link?
Yeah, and I'm like, okay. I mean, it's the day that I show up to be on camera, so it's like, it's a $200 shirt. So you want to buy a $200 shirt? What about my $50 deluxe vinyl? What about my $10 CD? What about my, you know what I mean? Where do I get that shirt? Sorry, that was like totally a personal thing, but
yeah, I was telling you before, like so many of the clips have been ripped, and reposted without my name on it, and there's a little bit of like, hey, that's mine, but like, again, the intention was like, let's get this out as far and wide as possible.
Yeah.
And there's no better way of knowing that that's happened when people just start pirating it.
Right. Where it's just like, this is just part of the internet now.
Yeah.
Which was the goal.
Yeah. And people are just like,
are you monetizing this stuff at all?
No.
Are you seeing a dime from any of this?
No.
Aside from like when you went on tour, did you ever?
Well, even
like
when
Fear of a Brown Planet was a DVD.
Oh, you mean ever in comedy or these clips?
Well, I know. I'm saying in this moment. So in this moment, you're not making a dime from any of this.
No,
like you sold some tickets to the shows.
Well, that's
not changing your life.
That was just to break even.
Yeah.
Right? Because for me, the purpose of the shows was to get something on film.
Yeah.
So I almost broke even, which is fine, Spend a week with Ruben, hang out with my friends.
Meaning you didn't break even.
I didn't. Yeah.
You went in your own pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want any kind of incentive other than just wanting to get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good, like put it out there. And sometimes I go to the comments, I'm like, does anyone even want to know who I am? There's like one comment, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Otherwise it's like, great, awesome, whatever. But it's like people are not even curious about, like, 1 in 100 people is like, oh, where can I find more of this stuff? Fine.
Yeah. That happened with my Sway freestyle. Where it's just like, and it's funny because people had no context for like what. So there are people that just looking at me and it'll be like old white man court, or like wasn't expecting this, you know what I mean? Or something like that. And I'm just like, man, all right. I mean, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, where are some of the places that you've seen it show up, or like, what are some of the reactions that you've seen that have touched you particularly? Or there have been moments that,
I think people that I really admire, like artists that I really admire and respect, sharing it or liking it. That's, for any artist, that's like your ultimate validation, right? Or one of your favorite rappers likes it or messages you about it, or, stuff like that. And yeah, just the general reception of it, because all art, but like comedy especially, is not all of it, but often is you're retelling people a truth, right?
mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if it's about airplane food or colonialism, whatever. People have to have some understanding of what you're talking about and some ideas about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you describe it to them in a way that they recognize. They're like, yeah, it is like that, And so that's why, I think reverse racism, like, connected with people, because it explains something that everyone kind of knows, or definitely argues about online. The number of times that clip has been used to, like, try and end a Facebook argument, punch a Nazi, people know it's right, but how do you, like, talk about it or argue with someone about it? And it's the same. It's just like, for me, it's just like, how do I give? It's not this like clinical, but like I want it to be the thing that gives young people like a kind of language to understand what they're feeling, because that's what art did for me. Yeah, that's what hip hop and stand up that I watched did for me. Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. Like this is describing how I feel.
Yeah. And doing it in a way that's victorious. There's all of this confirmation happening, and then a room full of people laugh at it. Like somewhere, this was the dominant narrative. Yes. You know what I mean?
It's victorious because just being able to name the system. Right. To name the scheme that's being pulled on you. That's a type of dignity. Yes. Where you're not just a victim who's having the wool pulled over your eyes. It's like, no, I can see the architecture of what you're doing. Like there's a special kind of dignity in that art provides. That's, political comedy always gets this, like, oh, it's clapter, people are clapping, not like it's not funny, they're just clapping because they agree with you. I'm like, it's like, that happens at every show.
Yes. Yeah. There are people that are just like, it's true. But so I went for the 2 shows, and the first day Jamali was there, who's like one of my best friends. You know what I mean? And
shout out Jamali, all the way from Chicago.
Man, yeah, Jamali, inshallah, will be on the podcast at some point. Like Jamali and what him and his family represent, and him and his wife and the work they do, and just incredible. But yeah, Jamali flew all the way from Chicago. We came from Istanbul, and me and Jamali sat there. I'm saying, like, it was not polite laughing for our friend because we did, like, we're pushing each other, and like, you know what I'm saying? And in a lot of those clips, I can hear Jamali.
Yeah, I can hear both of you.
I definitely hear him.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying? Because, like, man, Jamali's laugh, and I hear his dad's voice.
To the point where we both thought he was at another show.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Saturday night? I was like, was Jamali there? And you were like, was Jamali there? Because we both heard him in the crowd. Yeah. It was the echo of his original laugh.
So I could hear the difference between when people were laughing along with you because that's the crowd participation aspect of it. And when people are genuinely like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. You know what I mean? So there are more clips to come.
Just a couple more. Like I think 3 or 4 more. Yeah.
One of the things that I come across a lot. So, somebody did an interview one time and, they called me. It was a big person on a big platform called me because they wanted to interview another very prominent person. And I'm the one that connected them. And it was interesting because I watched the interview having no expectation of getting a shout out. And the person actually was like, it was a lot to get you to come to this interview. I had to put in the Brother Ali call. You know what I mean? And somebody was like, oh, I know the Brother Ali call.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, this is actually being said in the interview on the mic. And I called the person to thank them. And they were like, yo, I almost told them take that out because I didn't think you wanted to be mentioned.
Right.
I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? But there is a thing sometimes, like when you've been underground so long, people think it's a choice.
Yeah.
So would you write for, if you could come in and be Aamer Rahman, would you write for other artists? Would you act in films? Would you be in?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
I just need that said on the
sure.
record. But it's important for people to know, like, man, please don't pretend that I didn't want to be part of your reindeer games. You know what I'm saying?
Man, this is something I learned so late in comedy. And it's so naive in hindsight. But I always had this attitude of like, well, yeah, I'm not sucking up to other comedians. I don't need to be friends with you. I'm doing my own thing. And in my mind, I just thought, okay, and then the magic people who do TV and film will see, will spot you at some point and put you in stuff. But the way it works is that comedians who are working invite their friends to collaborate, and that's how you move up.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're like definitely not making friends with people, you're not going to go anywhere.
You had viral moments early on. You made the choice not to continue on and to try to invest your life's work into being a comedian in the comedy scene. And then, seeing what's happening in this moment, you saw a direct void. You very quickly had the takes and crafted the material. In 1 week's worth of shows, you were able to get these you missed your son's birthday, anything for Palestine, knowing going into it that like I'm probably shutting any future doors in the industry.
I think that's another thing that I think people are like, in people's minds it would be like, well, you don't have anything to lose because you're not in the industry. But
those are people who don't know what they're talking about.
What I'm saying, it's like it's preemptively shutting off so much, because there was always a part of me that did want to, not all of me, but some of me wanted to come out, even if it was just to prove it to myself. Can I still do comedy? Can I still be a comedian? And so it wasn't as simple as like, I've got nothing to lose, I'll go out guns blazing. No, it's still a decision for me that like I'm going to say these things and it will very likely cut certain things off for life. These things can't be taken back. People are not going to forget that I said these things. Yeah. But, I'm not saying that to be like a martyr or anything, but I'm just saying that's the reality of the decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely like once you have that scarlet letter, once you have that stain, and once you get that stamp, I mean, unless there's some sort of like major, that will be who you are forever. And it's interesting that the public doesn't always remember, but the gatekeepers do.
Absolutely.
The gatekeepers, just like, there's a lot of racist things that have been said that most people, and you're like, I never forget. You know what I mean? Those gatekeepers never forget. It's so, you're so easily replaced because of the fact that nobody else will say this.
And, I always say that, it doesn't have to be, I mean, I think in your case, it is very, like, these are active decisions. obviously to not book you over a particular thing. But yeah, I think for me and for other political artists, sometimes it's not, there's not like a room full of people sitting in a room being like, let's make sure he doesn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to ignore you.
Right.
They just have to ignore you. They just don't let you up the ladder. And then what do you how long can you survive at the bottom? How long can you survive just doing 3 cities in a country?
Yeah.
Before you give up and walk away.
Yeah.
But I also have to say, man, like I specifically couldn't have done that without you, without not just like the decision to do it, but the many conversations over the years leading up to it. And JJ.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I'm saying, man, there's people who, because, the thing that really, like, as much as you know how it's set up, that their validation isn't what dictates, your worth or whatever. At the end of the day, when you don't succeed to the point where you kind of have to give it up, there's no way that it doesn't affect a part of you. It still affects me. I'm just like, nah, I'm not that good. Like, I'm not, it's garbage. I'll, if I try to write another show, it'll be trash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the only thing that can counter that is like external voices of people who keep saying like, no, it is worth it.
Yes.
It is good. People do enjoy it. People, that's real.
And it's you know what I'm saying? It's 100% mutual. You know what I mean? That like, cause it's same thing for me. Like I'm like, oh, well, wait, is it, maybe I'm just not dope anymore. Like maybe I'm old. Like maybe, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe like you can only really be fat when you're young. You know what I'm saying? For real, all these things you think. Like, well, man, maybe it has nothing to do with any of this. You know what I'm saying? Like we gaslight ourselves.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, as much as it hurts for certain people to not say anything, it's like, man, where would we be if it wasn't for Saul and for Amanda and for Technique and for Dead Prez and for, you know what I'm saying? It's like, man, and that's ultimately what's way more important to me than anything that we don't get or anything that like misses us. Is like we've got our relationship with God and the truth, and then we have our relationship with other people that are just like, one of the first times I knew me and Ant were close, this group of like rappers came and they were upset with me about something. I had told the truth about something. It was actually Yassine didn't show up for a concert. early days, you know what I'm saying? And I knew, and they kept selling tickets, and I knew, so I got on the mic, and they're like, Brother Ali, so I'm like, if I go out there, I'm telling them the truth. They're like, just go out there. So I was like, Mos Def's not here, and he's not coming.
You to perform and then send everyone home.
They wanted to keep selling tickets because they're going to give them a rain check.
Yeah.
But there was this big group that was supposed to perform, and they were like well-known, established, like a big group of big dudes. And so they showed up one time at one of my shows and they wanted to battle, and I had to battle, and they were saying they were going to jump me and stuff. And man, I'm sitting there like, damn, like I wasn't in there with my crew. I'm thinking I'm at like an underground white boy rap show. You know what I mean? I'm just like, I'm really about to get jumped. And I remember telling them dudes, I'm like, hey man, obviously if this goes down, like I already know what it is. But you need to know that I'm telling the truth now, and I told the truth then. And Ant was there, and Ant was like, man, I'll get beat up with you. You know what I mean? There's something so like, hey man, I'll get beat up with you.
We're gonna lose together. It's great.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, man. So that's in a lot of ways, that's what this podcast is for. So thank you.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Special thanks to my dear friend, my brother, my friend, one of my great inspirations, Aamer Rahman, my favorite comedian, for being so generous with his time. It's very late at night here in Istanbul, and we live on the other side of the water, so now we got to figure out how we're going to get home. We might be sleeping in JJ's studio tonight. But yeah, very, very, really, really grateful to have been able to have this conversation, to have it documented. Shout out to you for listening. Again, There's no ad budget behind this. There's not a big company behind this. The producer for this podcast is BK1, who's my partner in Travelers Media. And it's really just the two of us just putting these things out there into the world. So if you are digging what you're hearing, like, share, subscribe, spread the word. Understand you have a huge role in that. Special shout out to the caravan. If you go to brotherali.com, there's an area called Join where we've got a caravan. It's something similar to a Patreon. But shout out to all of the people there that support. Shout out to Crystal Adams and to James Huff and to the entire crew over there. My man Vince. Salamu alaikum. A lot of them end up becoming Muslim. If you hang around us too long, you just might mess around and become Muslim. If you are interested in Islam and you would like somebody to talk through it with, don't play games with me, because you will get hours of unsolicited voice messages from me. Reach out in the various ways to do that. Shout out to all of the people who listen to the podcast, like my friends that listen and give me feedback. People like Aida Rashid, people like Chaplain Shane, people like Imam Khalis Rashad, people like Imran Ali Malik. You know what I'm saying? There's people all over the world that listen and give us feedback. We're grateful to you. Again, check out the Zakat Foundation, zakat.org. All the dope work that they do. brotherali.com for everything else. Much love. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.